Counsel?
May I proceed?
Yes.
Your Honor, we had on the board a page that we've been talking about, which, for the purpose of the record, is the best way to put it. And I want to put it back up on the board.
All right.
Thank you. Now, this was the page that you were just telling us about this page, and down at the bottom there, it has client's signature. Would that be Janet Arvizo's signature?
Yes, it would.
And that's dated November 15, 2001. That would have been the date that she signed that?
Correct.
And it says, copy to client. So the client, that being Janet Arvizo, would have gotten a copy of this as well. Is that correct?
Correct.
Now I'm going to put up the next page in order in the exhibit, 5106. Looking at the top part, did this have something to do with the application of Janet Arvizo on November 15, 01?
That's what they used to clear her name, and if she had a previous case with the county.
Alright, so when it's like running a records check, is that correct?
Yes, that's our Medi-Cal system that form is from.
And the date is November 15, 01, so that would have been when that was done.
Correct.
I see some handwriting on the bottom. Is that your handwriting?
No, it's not.
Okay, what would be the purpose of this type of a note in the file?
We don't have a screener. The intake worker that was interviewing her before me would have taken notes down. And once it became aware to that intake worker that it was a domestic violence, and then she referred her to me.
Okay, that's interesting. You can turn around a bit, it will make it easier, and I'll ask you about that in a minute. Turn around this way, and that will make it easier to talk into the microphone. You said the case was referred to you because it was domestic violence?
Correct.
Do you have some particular role there with regard to domestic violence cases?
I was the intake domestic violence worker.
So when Janet Arvizo first came in, she talked to another intake worker. Is that correct?
Correct.
And that intake worker would have gone over the same questions. Is that correct?
Not on the application.
Okay.
Which does a screening first to see what the participant needs.
Okay, so a preliminary kind of screening?
Correct.
And then when it was determined who should get the final screening, it was sent to you to do the final screening.
The final intake.
Alright, now, the intake worker. And now you can turn around, if you like, and take a look. The intake worker made a note here, and this says, looks like, mother and 3 children, all US born, and then it indicates, Gavin has cancer. Advised mother to apply for SSI. Would that be an ordinary kind of a note?
Yes.
And that would be the course of action that an intake worker might pursue, is that right?
Correct.
So in addition to the benefits that are being sought through your office, Janet Arvizo was advised that she could apply for benefits through the federal government through SSI, is that correct?
Correct.
And that's a program under Social Security, correct?
Correct.
It also indicates, and I'm going to lengthen the abbreviations, unless I'm wrong, so tell me, month last worked was October 31st, 01 due to surgery on her foot, is that correct?
Correct.
And then it says, on DIB, I guess disability?
Correct.
$104 a week for disability that she was getting?
Correct.
Now, it says, no bank accounts. No cars.
Correct.
Does that reflect, in the ordinary course of business in your department, that somebody would have asked her, do you have any bank accounts?
Yes, we did.
And any cars?
Yes.
And you not only ask for cars, but you ask for access or use of a vehicle, is that right?
Correct.
And according to this, there was no bank accounts and no use of a vehicle?
Well, the no cars would be that she does not own a vehicle.
Fair enough. And no bank accounts would be no bank accounts, right?
Correct.
Alright, and then it says, what's the abbreviation down there?
It says, participant.
Participant. Okay, participant also applying for divorce due to domestic violence, DV.
Correct.
So this would have been information coming from Janet Arvizo to that first worker, is that correct?
Correct.
And when you got the file, then, you would have looked at that note in the file.
Right.
And in fact, that's the reason it was sent to you particularly, because it was a DV case, domestic violence case.
Right.
Alright, the next ask leave to put up the next piece of paper in order, if I may.
You may.
And this is another piece of paper. It says, emergency, on the side there. Whose handwriting is that? Do you know?
No, I don't.
Would that be the applicant's handwriting?
No, I believe it would be one of our clerks.
So it would probably be an intake worker of some sort?
No, one of our clerks, the receptionist.
So this would be the very first page, the very first piece of paper in the process?
Correct.
Okay, and it shows the applicant is applying for various benefits, and it says, are you in need of emergency? I think that's what it says. Are you in need of emergency?
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
By that we mean emergency benefits, correct?
Correct.
And then down here it says, domestic abuse, child and spousal, correct?
Correct.
And this is based on information that would have been obtained from Janet Arvizo herself?
Correct.
An emergency request, as noted up here on the end, is that noted for some reason in your department?
Yes, in order to expedite services to that participant.
And why do you? I mean, it may be obvious, but explain why you have a process to expedite services.
One might be the families in danger. We don't want to put the children in, and, the woman back in there.
Alright, and so they need to have money right away so they can go someplace to be safe?
Well, not always cash, but we can locate a shelter.
Okay, and so when you say, emergency, it means, we're just not going to put this in the system and go through the normal process. We're going to pay special attention to your case.
Correct.
Alright, I'm going to put up 5,099, if I may. That's been received.
All right.
If you were aware, you haven't seen this before, but this is admitted into evidence. If you were aware that Janet Arvizo personally, in addition to what her children got, had received a check for $32,000, $32,308, and that she had, it's dated on November 2nd, that she had actually deposited it in her bank on November 5th, 2001, would that have affected your decision as to whether or not this was an emergency case?
Yes, it would.
Okay, now, you mentioned that there was a need to fill out a monthly application form, or a monthly. I'm sorry, what do we call it? It was a monthly form to show that there were no changes, is that correct?
Correct.
Alright, sorry, Your Honor, excuse me just 1 second. I may be wrong, but I'm not sure that I find all the monthly eligibility reports in here. Did you see a set for monthly and then quarterly?
I didn't see a set. I believe I saw one.
Yeah, with the court's permission, I'll put this up.
All right.
And this, for the record, is from 5106 and it's a page somewhere in the middle. I'll put it back in the same order. Now, this particular form, this is the monthly eligibility report that you would expect to be filled out by applicants each month to be entitled to welfare assistance the next month. Is that correct?
Correct.
Skipping down to the bottom, this one is dated the 10th of January 03, correct?
Correct.
Okay, it says here, received January 9th, 03. And then it says, upside down, SCU scanned. What does that mean?
We have clerks that scan the reports as they come in.
Is it possible that these other reports are scanned in the system somewhere and they just didn't make it to the court documents?
Yes.
In fact, you would expect that, if somebody received.
Correct.
If somebody received assistance the entire time, you would expect to have these every month?
Yes. If not, their case would be terminated.
This is really hard to read, so, I'm going to try to make it harder. I'll make it a little easier there. This question, number 3, is that a standard question on all of these monthly eligibility reports?
Yes.
And what's the purpose of question number 3?
It's to determine eligibility.
And in essence, you want to find out if, during the last month or since the last report, there has been any change, people have come up with some money from some source. Is that right?
Correct.
And it says, did anyone receive money or benefits from any other source? All right?
Correct.
And it says, include child, spousal support, interest or dividends. Now, that would pertain to interest or dividends on accounts that were held in the name of children. Is that right?
Correct.
I'll skip over here. Legal settlements, strike benefits. Cash is included, is that right?
Correct.
And it wouldn't matter whether it was cash in greenbacks, as they say, or if it was a cashier's check, is that right?
Correct.
Or a regular check, right?
Correct.
Gifts? So a gift would count, right?
Correct.
Loans? If somebody said, well, I'm going to loan it to the person. If they can pay it back, fine, and if they can't, it's okay, it would still go in there, right?
It would still go in the record.
There's a number of other things here. Basically, that's intended to describe what you mean by anyone receive money or benefits from any other source, right?
Correct.
Okay, now, on the 10th of January 03, it appears that this applicant said, no change, and checked the box, no, there. Is that correct?
Correct.
There is a second page to this form, is there not?
The reverse side.
Should be on the other side? Ah, yes, there is. How about that? And on this form question 7, it says, did anyone move in or out of your home, or did you move in with someone else? Correct?
Correct.
And if somebody had moved in with their boyfriend and were living there, you would want to know about it?
Yes.
What if somebody was just living there about half the time? Would you still want to know about it?
Yes.
And this person said, no. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And then, just in case, it's hard to make it fit yet be able to read it. But in this particular case, it says, does anyone have anything else to report, including expected changes, etc.? Right?
Correct.
So you're really telling them, look, be honest with us. Tell us what's going on in your life, right?
Yes.
And then this form was signed by Janet Arvizo on the 1st of January 03, is that correct?
Correct.
And was that form relied upon by your office for the purpose of disseminating welfare benefits?
Yes.
And you saw some of these checks that I showed you, I think 3 checks there, from January, February and March of 2003, the last one being March 17, 2003. Were those checks, based on, in at least one case, this particular form, and in all cases on filing a similar form?
Yes, it is.
Now, if somebody received $600 in cash at Christmas because they said they really needed money and a nice person said, here, I'm going to give you $600, is that something that should have been reported on such a form?
Yes.
Would that affect eligibility?
It could affect eligibility.
Okay, in February of 2003. Now we have a March 17, 2003, check showing welfare was still being received. If a person received a check in the amount of, I'm sorry, either check or cash in the amount of $2,000 on February 20th, is that something they should have reported to welfare?
Yes.
If a person were receiving several $1,000s for their living expenses from various sources, from a corporation and from an individual, during a period of time from February to early March, is that something that should have been reported by the person before accepting a March 17th welfare check?
Yes.
With the court's permission, I'll put up the next page in order.
Yes.
Oh, before I do that, let's assume somebody receives a windfall. They get a lot of money and they got their February check and they know they got all this money. They don't report it for some reason, and they get their March 17th check. Is it proper for them to keep that check?
It all depends when they received this amount of money.
If they received let's say they received the amount of money during the month of February and then they go ahead and get a check March 17th, and deposit it or cash it sometime later in the month. Is that appropriate or should they refuse to cash it?
I'm going to object as vague as to the term, appropriate, or proper.
Overruled. You may answer.
They should report it, and if they received it in January, it would affect their March.
Okay, would February affect their March?
We would consider it as a resource and we would have to do a worksheet on it. Yes, it would.
So before they are really entitled to a March 17th check, you'd theoretically want to know about what money they received in February?
Yes.
And welfare. Recipients of, people who are receiving these benefits from the government are advised, are they not, that they have to report any significant changes in their situation?
Yes.
I'm going to now, if I may, put up the next page. First of all, who is Pamela Adkins?
I believe she's another worker at the Lincoln Heights office.
So we have, attention, Pamela Adkins, with a little heart over the I there. So this is a note to somebody in your office, is that correct?
Correct.
And the fax number, is that a fax number you're familiar with?
That's a fax number to Lincoln Heights.
Alright, I'm not sure. Let me just see. Here. Don't, just. If I may, let me put it up and see if you can read it there. Otherwise, I'll bring it up to you. Can you tell what the fax date on this is?
No.
Okay, may I approach the witness?
Yes.
Of course, now you're sitting in the dark, which is apparently my fault here. But can you see that?
I can see partially.
If I may just ask the question up here, Your Honor.
Yes.
Can you tell me what date that was faxed?
It appears to be March 3, 2003.
Okay, very well. Now I'm going to put this up again. And it says, I, Janet Arvizo, chooses to discontinue and be off of the welfare system aid effective today, 3-3. Thank you so much, Janet Arvizo. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
Do you often receive letters like this?
We do receive.
So people tell you that circumstances have changed and they're no longer going to be on welfare?
Yes.
After this was sent, apparently this check of March 17th was cut and eventually sent to Janet Arvizo. Why would that be?
Because we have a cutoff date. If they wanted their aid terminated the beginning of March, that would be for the end of February they would give us notice. But this seems that she did this in March, and everything was already mailed out to be batched out.
So the check was in the pipeline one way or another.
Right.
Alright, now, if this person who wrote this, Janet Arvizo, had, in fact, during the month of March, I'm sorry, let me withdraw that. During the month of February of 2003, if Janet Arvizo had received several $1,000s in gifts, spa treatments, trips to Miami, private jet flights, lodging, food, if she had received that sort of thing during the month of February, should she have reported that to the welfare department?
Yes.
Now, if Janet Arvizo had, in fact, been living with her boyfriend, a major in the United States Army, who was paying her expenses and depositing her welfare checks in his bank account, should she have reported that?
I'm going to object as compound and assumes facts not in evidence, improper hypothetical.
I'll break it down, if you like.
The objection is sustained.
Okay, let's take it one at a time. If a person were, I think I asked you this part already, but let me just be sure. If a person were residing, a welfare applicant or participant were residing with her boyfriend in his apartment, is that something that should have been reported to the welfare department before accepting checks?
Yes.
If that person, in this case Janet Arvizo, were in fact depositing her welfare checks into her boyfriend's bank account, is that something that should have been reported?
Yes.
If the boyfriend were a major in the United States Army, with a base pay, exclusive of allowances, a base pay of over $5,000, is that something that should have been reported to the welfare department?
Yes.
If the boyfriend, the major in the United States Army, were, in fact, paying expenses for Janet Arvizo, is that something that should be reported?
Yes.
Would each of those factors have an impact on the eligibility of that person to receive welfare?
Yes.
And I'll ask you to assume, for the moment, that those facts are true that I just recited with regard to the boyfriend. Janet Arvizo was living there. He was a major in the United States Army. He was depositing her checks and he was paying some of the expenses, and his income was $5,000, more than $5,000 per month base pay. Would that cause her to be ineligible for the type of welfare that you see in this file?
No.
So she would still be able to get all this welfare?
Not all.
Okay, how would it affect her welfare?
We would determine what the cost, what he's paying, and we would include it as in kind, and we would deduct that from the amount of her grant. If he's purchasing, and they're purchasing and preparing their food together, their whole income has to be counted as one.
Alright, so you would have to do a calculation to see if she'd still be entitled to welfare?
Correct.
Now, if he had an automobile and she had the use of the automobile, is that something that you would want to have reported?
I'm going to object. Assumes facts not in evidence.
The testimony of Mrs. Arvizo.
The objection is overruled.
Is that something you would want to know?
If the vehicle's not in her name, it would not be counted towards her grant.
So there's a question on the original form about having the use of a vehicle. Is that something you do not have to disclose in the monthly updates?
Not on a monthly update.
Okay, now, if somebody is receiving more welfare than they're entitled to, is that a concern that you have?
Yes, it is.
And you had mentioned in your lay version of fraud. I'm not asking for a legal opinion, but you said you were trying to avoid fraud. Is that fraud that you're trying to avoid?
Yes.
Now I'm going to refer. If I may, Your Honor, this is the one I put up first, the statement of facts, which turns out to be chronologically second. I wanted to make sure everything was in the same order. Taking a look at this says, this is a statement of facts, and it says, current print date October 23, 02, correct?
Correct.
And I think we covered before that it says, for application dated November 15, 01. Is that right?
Correct.
So the next year, this is the one where Miss Arvizo came back and talked to Pamela Adkins in your office. Is that right?
Correct.
And we go through the same questions here as of October 23, 02 that we covered in the other form. The form remains the same. It didn't change. Is that right?
Correct.
And there remains the question, for instance, number 53, which I'll now put up with the court's permission. Has anyone received money from insurance or court settlements, inheritance, lottery or back pay in the last 3 years? Correct?
Correct.
So once again, that same settlement, if a settlement were received for $152,000 November 5, 2001, that should have been disclosed in response to that question even a year later, correct?
Yes.
And if the children of the applicant still had bank accounts that had money in them, is that something that should have been disclosed in this form?
Yes.
And it appears that it was not disclosed in this form. Is that correct?
Correct.
And I'm going to put the last page on, if I may, Your Honor.
Yes.
And this is the signature page, once again showing under penalty of perjury under the laws of the United States of America and the state of California. Is that correct?
Correct.
And it appears that Janet Arvizo signed this form on October 23, 02?
Correct.
And that, besides the monthly and later quarterly updates, I always forget the name of that. Whatever they're called, the monthly eligibility reports. In addition to that, the department, your department, relies on these statement of facts, these annual statement of facts in order to award welfare?
Correct.
Alright, I'm going to put, actually, this part of it being a little bit out of order here, there are a number of documents that you use, or let me withdraw that. There are a number of documents generated when there's a claim of domestic violence. Is that correct?
Correct.
Do the applicants always bring in their police reports and divorce papers?
No, not always.
In this case, do you know if Mrs. Arvizo brought in papers?
I believe she did.
Okay, and back in 2001. I apologize for the lack of sequence here, but I just discovered these. Back in 2001, did Janet Arvizo indicate that she did not want to go to a shelter?
Yes, sir.
And you gave her a form that gave information about domestic violence information. I'm sorry, that's redundant. You gave her a form entitled, Confidential Domestic Violence Information, is that correct?
Yes.
And that told her about her, the sorts of things that she could avail herself of in addition to the actual money that you were dispensing. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, I think I'm almost through here, Your Honor. Just one more moment. Did it appear at some point that you realized, I'm sorry. Did it appear at some point from this file that your department became aware that Janet Arvizo was receiving other assistance? Do you want to look at the file so?
Yes.
You don't know without looking?
No, I would not.
Alright, I'm going to approach with these 3 pages of the exhibit. I've just handed you 3 pages that appear to apply to other benefits other than the DPSS benefits. Is that correct?
Correct.
And what does that show?
That she was entitled to receive, that she did receive disability benefits.
Okay, so is that something that, a check that you run through your computer somehow?
Yes, there's a match.
May I approach and exchange documents? This one for that one. This is a document I've located in your file. It appears to be a rent receipt, and it's in the Janet Arvizo file from your department. Why would that be in there?
We use a rent amount in order to calculate her food stamp allotment.
Okay, and that shows that Raymond Trujillo was getting $400 and some a month, is that correct?
Correct.
So in the course of calculating her food stamp allowance, you were assuming that she was actually paying rent in October of 2002 of $400 and some a month, is that correct?
Correct.
If you were aware that the landlord had allowed her to stay in that apartment rent-free for a period of time, would that have been something that should have been reported to you? Let me withdraw that, because that question made no sense, if you're aware of it. Let me put it this way. If a person presenting a rent receipt like that in fact had been given free rent for a period of time by her landlord, is that something that should have been reported to you?
Yes.
And if, in fact, in 2003, in January and February, somebody else was paying that rent, that $425 a month, is that something that should have been reported to the department?
Yes.
Okay, if I may retrieve that so I can put it back in the same place here. Okay, I have no further questions of this witness at this time.
Good afternoon, Miss Manrriquez.
Good afternoon.
Tell me, why is there a domestic violence unit in the welfare department?
We have a domestic violence worker, and the reason is that we want to make sure that we take care of those people. We don't want to put them in any danger. We want to take them out of that.
Do they have special needs that need to be addressed in the welfare system that are different from your average recipient of welfare?
Their safety.
Okay. And when you spoke to Janet Arvizo back in 2001, did she express concern for her safety in regards to her domestic violence situation?
Yes, she did.
In what way did she express her concern for her safety?
That she was afraid to go back home.
Alright. In fact, did she ask for an escort from the welfare department to accompany her to her home to make sure she was safe?
We don't escort our participants.
But isn't there a request in the file from her to obtain an escort?
Yes, there is.
To transfer her home, to help her get home safely?
Yes.
Now, in your reports, your official reports indicate that she was receiving welfare, food stamps and Medi-Cal. Is that correct?
Correct.
And the Medi-Cal covers insurance, health insurance, over and above an individual's needs that are covered by their own insurance. Is that correct?
Correct.
So if a person has their own insurance, that doesn't exclude them from Medi-Cal?
Does not exclude them.
So if Janet Arvizo had insurance coverage, that wouldn't prevent her from getting these benefits?
No, it would not.
Do you know if she received any Medi-Cal benefits?
Medi-Cal goes hand in hand with CalWorks.
But if she actually received any insurance proceeds from Medi-Cal, do you know if any?
I don't know.
Okay. And as far as her receiving disability, counsel asked you a few questions about that she received some disability benefits, is that right?
Yes.
And were those disability benefits for a time when she was unable to work because she had to have surgery?
Yes, it is.
Objection. Well, calls for speculation.
Well, is that reflected? I'll let the court rule.
What you're asking her as if that's on the application.
Yes.
Rephrase your question.
The question, really, I have is based upon your records. Is it reflected that Janet Arvizo had to have some surgery, and that's why she went on disability for a period of time?
It's noted at the intake.
Okay. And that was for a limited period of time while she was going through her medical procedures?
I believe so.
Okay. In your experience, how diligent are welfare recipients, if you can characterize, about these details concerning reporting gifts, reporting if someone lets them use their car, that kind of thing? How?
Objection. Compound. Vague, and not relevant.
Sustained.
Do you often find that at Christmastime people come rushing down to the welfare office to report their Christmas gifts?
Objection. Argumentative.
Sustained.
When did the quarterly notices go into effect?
Quarterly notices, I believe, I want to say July of 2004. I thought it was 3, but it may be 2004. We just went in, CalWorks.
Okay.
Just went into quarterly reports.
Did you say before it was 2003?
I did, but I believe it's 2004.
Are you sure?
I'm not positive.
Is it possible that it was in effect in 2003, based on your recollections?
It may have been, but like I say, I'm not positive.
If a mother sets up a trust account for their child, based upon proceeds from a personal injury case, and this trust account cannot be touched by the mother or by the child until that time. The time that the child reaches maturity, 18 years old, would that affect a person's right to receive welfare?
Objection. Improper hypothetical. It assumes facts not in evidence.
Sustained.
Can you tell me if funds placed in trust for a child, let's say by a lawyer, that the child cannot receive, would those funds placed in trust that the child cannot touch, would that affect their eligibility for welfare?
Objection. Assumes facts not in evidence.
Overruled.
Yes, it would.
Okay. And if the funds cannot be used for current needs, why would that limit eligibility for welfare?
They would have to actually bring in a statement saying that they cannot touch it, but even if they were to be penalized for withdrawing that money.
I'm saying they can't withdraw the money even with penalty. It cannot be withdrawn. It's untouchable.
I object. This calls for speculation. It's an improper hypothetical. Assumes facts not in evidence.
I believe counsels asked numerous questions about interest on these accounts.
Sustained.
I believe it still would have.
Just a minute. He has to ask another question.
Oh, I'm sorry, sir.
If a child is going to receive benefits at 18 that he cannot receive before that time, regardless of the benefit, okay? It's an item that the child cannot receive. The child is, let's say, a teenager. Would that affect eligibility for welfare?
Well, again, improper hypothetical. Assumes facts not in evidence.
Sustained.
Alright, if a welfare recipient does not have a bank account of their own, and they allow a friend to cash that check for them, and then they obtain those welfare benefits from that friend, is that a violation of the rules of receiving welfare?
No.
Okay, so if an individual has a boyfriend and she uses his account to simply cash the check, and then she receives those funds, that's not a violation?
That's not.
What about if she uses those funds to be deposited into his account and then he, in turn, writes a check, for instance, to her landlord? In other words, using the funds for the benefit intended, but it's just run through the paperwork in that fashion. Is that a violation? Do you understand the question?
I believe I do understand, and he's the one, we, in our department, would say he is the one paying the bills.
Okay, but if, let's say the boyfriend simply writes the check to the landlord. She gives him $450 from her welfare. He writes a check to the landlord for $450 to the landlord. Is that a problem?
Yes, it would be.
And why would that be?
We are now looking that he's making out the check. He's paying it.
Okay.
He's the one that's paying the rent.
Even though the benefit to the welfare recipient is the same?
Correct.
Would that term be something more technical in nature?
Yes.
Alright, and as far as receiving, let's say, a trip to Miami. Suppose someone takes you to Miami, pays for your plane fare to Miami, allows you to stay, at their expense, at a hotel for a couple of days, and then you fly back, all at the expense of this friend. Is that something that's going to affect your eligibility for welfare?
No.
Alright, thank you. I have no further questions.
Okay, let's just pick up where we left off. If during the month of February, let us say, somebody not only takes the trip to Miami, has all expenses paid, including food, but during this same period of time they then return and stay, all expenses paid, somewhere during the entire month, including another luxury hotel for a period of time, including a beautiful home that belongs to a major celebrity. The whole month, in essence, they're taken care of. Is that something that needs to be reported?
If it's over 30 days that they're out of their home, they need to report that.
Okay, so if it was from February 6th to March the 12th, where either the children or the parent, or both of them, were out of the home, living all expenses paid on somebody else's nickel, is that something that should have been reported?
Objection. Compound. Assumes facts not in evidence.
Sustained.
You're basically looking to find out if this is somebody who, month to month, has a need for welfare, correct?
Yes.
Okay, now, I posed several hypotheticals to you, and I want to avoid doing them all again, but we had a number of expenses that were paid that we talked about being paid that include not only lodging, but food, purchase of gifts, spa treatments, full body waxes, cosmetics. If somebody was receiving that kind of a treatment for a month, is that the sort of person who should also be receiving a check from the government for welfare?
Objection. Vague, compound and assumes facts not in evidence. I'll throw in argumentative, too.
Sustained.
Do you want to have accurate information on your monthly reports so that you can evaluate who's really entitled to welfare in this state when you're doing the job as an eligibility worker?
Yes.
Objection. Asked and answered. Beyond the scope.
Overruled.
I'm sorry. Did you rule, Your Honor?
Overruled.
Thank you. And the answer came in?
I believe so.
Okay. Now, I'd like to put up 5,098. 5,099 first, if I may.
I'm going to object as beyond the scope.
Overruled. Go ahead.
All right. I think I showed you this check for $32,307.88, something like that, and asked you about this previously. The district attorney asked you about some kind of trust account. If Janet Arvizo, in fact, had access to this money, no matter whose name the account was in, is that something that should have been reported on her initial form on November 15, 01?
Yes.
Okay, and I'll put up 5,098, if I may. This has been received into evidence that there was, in fact, a cashier's check to Hollywood Ford, but there's no indication as to who actually got the proceeds from this check. However, it was withdrawn shortly after the money was deposited in Miss Arvizo's account, and it was withdrawn by Miss Arvizo herself. Is that the kind of financial transaction that you would want to know about days before deciding whether or not she's entitled to welfare?
Yes.
I believe, it's hard to see, and I apologize. I believe that's November 9th. I think that's what it says up there. Now, if somebody has access to funds and uses the funds, it doesn't matter what the name of the account is, does it?
As long as they're a household member.
Okay, so now we'll move on to, there's one question to which there was not an objection sustained that had to do with a trust account. If the children of Miss Arvizo, Star and Gavin, received between them in excess of $40,000 at this same time that you just saw these transactions for Janet Arvizo herself, if they received an additional $40,000, whether.
I'll object to the amount. Misstates the evidence.
Go ahead. Complete your question.
Well, let's do it. Just so. I believe that's correct, but let me just put it this way. If one child received in excess of $25,000 and the other child received in excess of $10,000 at the same time that this transaction occurred when Mrs. Arvizo received her $32,000, and that money was put in any kind of a bank account for their benefit, is that something that was required to be disclosed to your department on these forms?
Yes.
Now, the district attorney in that question about a trust account. Does it matter whether it's a trust account or not a trust account, if they received the money for their benefit?
No, it should be reported.
And if it's reported and there's some argument about it, you would want to see all the documentation about that account, is that correct?
Correct.
But the form clearly says you have to report any money in bank accounts for any of the people in the family, is that right?
Correct.
Alright, there were questions about the boyfriend paying the rent, and I got lost on some of that, but basically one of the concerns that you have in your department is that participants will receive benefits, let us say, and at some point their circumstances change and they start living with someone else who starts providing for their basic needs, and you need to know about that. Is that correct?
Correct.
Alright, and it's not uncommon that people will move in with a boyfriend or a girlfriend, and that boyfriend or girlfriend will start paying for things that the participant previously had to pay for out of his or her own pocket, correct?
Correct.
And part of your screening process for each month's eligibility is to determine whether or not that has occurred, correct?
Correct.
And if you aren't told about it, you don't have an ability to evaluate it, is that right?
Correct.
And you believe that it's part of the reporting requirement that a person who moves in with a boyfriend, and the boyfriend is not only cashing the welfare checks, but also paying rent and paying other expenses on behalf of the participant, that participant has an obligation to report that so you can evaluate it, correct?
Correct.
Objection. Asked and answered.
Compound. Sustained.
It wasn't asked and answered? If it wasn't, I won't ask any more questions.
Okay. Asked and answered.
There you go. Okay. I have no further questions.
Just real quickly. Clearly, if Mrs. Arvizo received a $30,000 settlement, that should have been reported and mentioned to welfare. Isn't that fair to say?
Correct.
The only question that I have remaining is not whether or not the reporting of funds placed in a trust account for children should have taken place. My question is, provided that the children in the family received those funds, they were placed in trust, and they cannot be touched until the children became adults, that wouldn't affect the eligibility for welfare, would it, just as far as eligibility goes?
Objection. Improper hypothetical. Assumes facts not in evidence.
Sustained.
I believe there are a couple of exhibits that are in evidence, 820 and 824, dealing with the trust.
Let's see. I don't have those up here.
I can tell you my foundation based on, at sidebar if you want.
I'll look at your exhibit.
821 and 820.
The problem that I'm having with your hypothetical is that the problem in the exhibits is that under these compromises for minors, the court can always authorize the release of funds. So, every question you've asked, with the exception of one, presupposed that the minor couldn't get to the funds. And it's just not the law. The law is that the court can give access to the funds. That's what the document says. So let's go to our next question.
All right, I have no further questions then. Thank you.
All right.
Nor do I.
Thank you. You may step down.
You're welcome.
Call your next witness, please.
Thank you, Your Honor. The defense will call Miss Marian Arvizo.
When you get to the witness stand, please remain standing. Face the clerk here and raise your right hand.
I do. Please be seated. State and spell your name for the record.
My name is Marian Arvizo. Spelled Marian. Arvizo. Arvizo.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Miss Arvizo.
Good afternoon.
Miss Arvizo, are you related to David Arvizo?
Yes, I am.
How are you related to him?
I'm his sister.
Okay, and do you live in the Los Angeles area?
I do.
Okay, do you know Janet Arvizo?
Yes, I do.
And how do you know her?
She was married to my brother David Arvizo.
Approximately when did you first meet Janet Arvizo, just approximately?
About 19 years ago.
Okay, and did you stay in contact with her through the years?
No.
Okay, did you at some point learn that Gavin Arvizo was ill?
Yes, I did.
And how did you learn that?
Through fellow neighbors in the neighborhood that I live in, that my family lived in South El Monte.
This is El Monte?
In South El Monte.
Okay, now, at this point in time, when you learned that Gavin was ill, were Janet and David still together?
Yes, they were.
Okay, and did you visit Gavin at the hospital?
No, I didn't.
Did you get involved in any efforts to do any drives for Gavin?
Yes, I did.
What did you do?
I organized a blood drive that was held at the Vaughn's warehouse in El Monte.
Now, approximately when did you start organizing the blood drive for Gavin?
I don't remember the dates and times. It was it was at the time where he was needing blood transfusions pretty frequently. And what happened is that the news had put out that they needed blood for him.
Okay.
Because.
Let me just ask one question at a time, if I can. Thank you. You say that the news had put out information that there was a need for blood for Gavin?
Yes.
And did you hear that on the news?
Yes, I did.
So you were not talking to Janet when you learned that?
No, I didn't.
And did you learn there was a particular type of blood that he needed?
Yes.
And how did you learn that?
On the news.
Okay, what did you do after you learned that information on the news?
I started to see if I can organize a blood drive to get more of the blood type that he needed, because it was a rare blood type.
What did you do to organize the drive?
I knew of a woman that worked at Kaiser, who was in charge, by the name of Marie Triggs. And I talked to her and asked her how would I go about organizing a blood drive to help them out to make sure he had enough blood.
And did you learn from her what to do?
Yes, she did help me to organize the blood drives.
And Kaiser was the hospital that Gavin was being treated at?
Yes, she was, he was.
And what did you do to put a blood drive together?
We talked to one of the supervisors at the Vaughn's warehouse, and he opened up the warehouse for us to come in and have the guys donate blood. And Marie Triggs and I met there, and we went into the warehouse and set up in the break room and did a small blood drive there with all. I don't remember how many units of blood she got that day, but there was quite a few people that donated.
Now, why did you choose Vaughn's to do the drive?
I'm also an employee for Vaughn's, and I had heard through several people that there was a lot of guys at the warehouse that were interested in donating blood.
You say you're also an employee of Vaughn's. What did you mean by that? Who else are you referring to that was employed there?
My brother, David.
That's David?
Yes.
And so you both were working at Vaughn's at the same time?
He works in the warehouse now and I work in the stores.
Okay, and was David working at this point in time at Vaughn's, do you know?
No, I believe he was out.
Okay, was he out to visit David, sick, at the hospital?
I believe he was still with Gavin and going through the chemo and all the.
Right.
At the hospital.
So you had a blood drive, right?
Yes.
At Vaughn's?
Yes.
And approximately how many people do you think came to the blood drive?
I would say maybe 25 or 30.
Were they mostly people from Vaughn's?
They were all the guys in the warehouse.
Okay, and did you actually obtain blood for Gavin?
Yes, we did.
Okay, and did you do more than one blood drive?
Yes, we did, also did a second blood drive. One of my sisters, her sister-in-law's church donated the church recreational room. And Marie Triggs, my sister Karen and myself, we all met down at the church and we had a small blood drive there. It was just announced at the church, so we mostly had church members that came in to donate.
Now, did you communicate with Janet Arvizo about the blood drives you were organizing?
No, I didn't.
Did you ever talk to her at all about it?
No, I didn't.
Okay, did she ever contact you about a blood drive?
Yes, she did.
And approximately when was this, do you think?
I don't remember a certain day and time.
And do you remember whether or not she wanted to participate in the drive?
She didn't seem to want to participate. I didn't talk to her before the blood drives. I talked to her before the blood drives, not while I was doing the blood drives.
And did you offer her the opportunity to get involved?
No, I didn't.
Did you offer the opportunity to give her views about whether this was a good idea?
Well, there was a letter that went in the city of South El Monte that had information on our family, because we had been in the city for so many years, and that letter actually just said if you are willing to donate blood for Gavin, and gave a specific blood type, that to donate it at the Kaiser on Sunset, and just thanking. On behalf of the entire Arvizo family, we thank you. And Janet did call me on that.
Did Janet ever complain to you about the blood drive?
Yes, she did.
What did she say?
She told me that she didn't need my fucking blood. That she needed money.
And did she call you on the phone when she said that?
Yes, she did.
Are you okay?
Yes.
What was your response, if any?
I think I just hung up on her.
Did you ever talk to her again about the blood drive?
No, I don't believe so.
How many drives do you think you organized for Gavin?
There was 2 blood drives.
The second one was at the church?
The second one was at the church.
Okay, now, after David and Janet separated, do you recall an incident where Gavin, Star and Devellin were swimming?
Yes, they came over to my house and went swimming.
Okay, now, was this long after the separation? Do you know?
No, it was just in the beginning of the separation.
Okay, and they went swimming at your house?
Yes, they did.
And this was in El Monte?
This is in Covina.
Covina. Okay, alright. And do you recall whether or not Star ever made a comment about a house they were going to move to?
Objection. Hearsay.
Sustained.
Did you ever learn from Star that the family might move to the Hollywood Hills?
Objection. Hearsay.
Sustained.
Did you ever say anything to Star Arvizo about the family's moving to the Hollywood Hills?
Your Honor, the third objection. Hearsay.
Sustained.
Ask for an admonition.
Next question.
I'll move on. I'll move on, Your Honor. Have you had any contact with Janet since the conversation you just described?
No, I haven't.
Okay. Had you had any contact with any of the Arvizo children since the drives?
No.
No further questions.
Cross-examine?
Ms. Arvizo, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Do you know a Connie Keenan?
Do I know Connie Keenan? No, I don't.
You never met her?
I believe I met her today.
That's the first time you've ever met her?
Yes.
Had no prior association with her at all?
No.
Did you have a prior association with anybody who works at Mid-Valley News?
No, I don't.
Had you ever talked with anybody at Mid-Valley News?
No, I didn't.
Now, you testified that the manner in which you became familiar with the fact that your nephew needed this blood was from the news account. Is that correct?
Yes, I did.
Was that a news account on the radio or news account on television?
On television.
On television? And had you seen that throughout El Monte on a number of occasions or just on one occasion?
Actually, I was viewing the television set at my house in Covina.
You and your brother both work at Vaughn's, is that right?
Yes, we do.
Did you both work at the same Vaughn's?
No, he works in the warehouse and I work in the actual grocery stores.
And do you work in more than one store?
No, I work in one store.
Is there a reason your brother didn't tell you about the need for blood?
I didn't have contact with my brother.
During that period of time?
No, I didn't.
During the time that you were raising money on behalf of Gavin. Excuse me, not raising, but recruiting volunteers to donate blood on behalf of Gavin. Had you had any contact with your brother at all during that time?
Yes, I did.
And did he tell you about the need for blood that Gavin was experiencing at that time?
I explained to him that I was organizing blood drives and doing the best I can to get the information out. As far as him being involved, no.
And was that during the time that you were organizing the blood drives?
Yes, it was.
And prior to that, how long had it been since you had spoken with your brother David?
About 15 years.
Thank you. No further questions.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you. You may step down. Call your next witness.
Your Honor, shall we call a witness or have a break? Whatever you like.
Do you want a break early?
Sure.
All right.